Tomas was obsessed by the desire to discover and appropriate that 1 millionth part. He saw it as the core of his obsession. He was not obsessed with women, he was obsessed with what in each of them is unimaginable, obsessed, in other words, with the 1 millionth part that makes a woman dissimilar to others of her sex. Here, too, perhaps, his passion for surgery and his passion for women came together, even with his mistresses. He could never quite put down the imaginary scalpel, since he longed to take possession of something deep inside him. He needed to slit them open. We may ask, of course, why he sought that millionth part dissimilarity in sex and nowhere else. Why couldn't he find it, say, in a woman's gait or culinary caprices or artistic taste? To be sure, the millionth part dissimilarity is present in all areas of human existence, but in all areas other than sex it is exposed and needs no one to discover it. Needs no scalpel. One woman prefers cheese at the end of a meal, another loathes cauliflower, and although each may demonstrate her originality thereby, in an originality that demonstrates its own irrelevance, and warns us to pay it no heed, to expect nothing of value to come of it. Only in sexuality does the millionth part dissimilarity become precious, because not accessible to public, it must be conquered. As recently as 50 years ago, this form of conquest took considerable time, weeks, even months, and the worth of the conquered object was proportional to the time conquest took. Even today, when conquest time has been drastically cut, sexuality still seems to be a strong box, hiding the mystery of a woman's eye. So it was a desire not for pleasure. The pleasure came as an extra, a bonus, but for possession of the world, slitting open the outstretched body of the world with a scalpel, the sin in pursuit of women. 10. Men who pursue a multitude of women fit neatly into two categories. Some seek their own subjective and unchanging dream of women and all women. Others are prompted by a desire to possess the endless variety of the objective female world. The obsession with the former is lyrical. They seek in women as themselves, their ideal, and since an ideal is, by definition, something that can never be found, they are disappointed again and again. The disappointment that propels them from woman to woman gives their inconstancy a kind of romantic excuse that maybe sentimental women are touched by their unbridled philandering. The obsession of the latter is epic. The women see nothing, at least in it touching in it. The man projects no subjective ideal on women, and since everything interests him, nothing can disappoint him. This inability to be disappointed has something scandalous about it. The obsession of the epic womanizer strikes people as lacking in redemption, and redemption by disappointment, because the lyrical womanizer always runs after the same type of women. We even fail to notice when he exchanges one mistress for another. His friends perpetually cause misunderstandings by mixing up his lovers and calling them by the same name. In pursuit of knowledge, epic womanizers, and of course Tomas belonged in their ranks, turn away from conventional feminine beauty, of which they quickly tire, and inevitably end up as curiosity collectors. They are aware of this, and a little ashamed of it, and to avoid causing their friends embarrassment, they refrain from appearing in public with their mistresses. Tomas had been a window washer for nearly 2 years, when he was sent to a new customer, whose bizarre appearance struck him in the moment he saw her. Though bizarre, it was also discreet, understated, within the bounds of the agreeably ordinary. Tomas's fascination with curiosities had nothing in common with Fellini's fascination with monsters. She was very tall, quite a bit taller than he was, and she had a delicate and very long nose and a face so unusual that it was impossible to call it attractive. Everyone would have protested, yet in Tomas's eyes, at least, it could not be called unattractive. She was wearing slacks and a white blouse, and looked like an odd combination of a giraffe, stork, and a sensitive young boy. She fixed him with a long, careful, searching stare that was not devoid of irony's intelligent sparkle. "Come in, doctor," she said. Although he realized that she knew who he was, he did not want to show it, and asked, "Where can I get some water?" She opened the door to the bathroom. He saw a wash basin, a bathtub, a toilet bowl, and in front of bath, basin, and bowl lay miniature pink rugs. When the woman who looked like a giraffe and a stork smiled, her eyes screwed up, and everything she said seemed full of irony and secret messages. "The bathroom is all yours," she said. "You can do whatever your heart desires in it." "May I have a bath?" Tomas asked. "Do you like baths?" she asked. He filled his pail with warm water and went into the living room. "Where would you like me to start?" "It's up to you," she said with a shrug of the shoulders. "May I see the windows in the other rooms?" "So you want to have a look around?" Her smile seemed to indicate that the window washing was only a caprice that did not interest her. He went into the adjoining room. It was a bedroom with a large window, 2 beds pushed next to each other, and on the wall an autumn landscape with birches and a setting sun. When he came back, he found an open bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the table. "How about a little something to keep your strength up during the big job ahead?" "I wouldn't mind a little something, actually," said Tomas, and sat down at the table. "You must find it interesting seeing how people live," she said. "I can't complain," said Tomas. "All those wives at home alone, waiting for you." You mean grandmothers and mothers-in-law. Don't you ever miss your original profession? Tell me, how did you find out about my original profession? Your boss likes to boast about you, said the stork woman. After all this time, said Tomas in amazement. When I spoke to her on the phone about having the windows washed, she asked whether I didn't want you. She said you were a famous surgeon who had been kicked out of the hospital. Well, naturally, she piqued my curiosity. You have a fine sense of curiosity, he said. Is it so obvious? Yes, in the way you use your eyes. And how do I use my eyes? You squint. And then the questions you ask. You mean you don't like to respond? Thanks to her, the conversation had been delightfully flirtatious from the outset. Nothing she said had any bearing on the outside world. It was all directed inward toward themselves. And because it dealt so palpably with him and her, there is nothing simpler than to complement words and touch. Thus, when Tomas mentioned her squinting eyes, he stroked her, and she did the same to his. It was not a spontaneous reaction. She seemed to be consciously setting up a do-as-I-do kind of game, and so they sat there face to face, their hands moving in stages along each other's bodies. Not until Tomas reached her groin did she start resisting. He could not quite guess how seriously she meant it, since much time had now passed, and he was due at his next customer in 10 minutes. He stood up and told her he had to go. Her face was red. I have to sign the order slip, she said. But I haven't done a thing, he objected. That's my fault. And then in a soft, innocent voice, she drawled, I suppose I'll just have to order you back and have you finish what I kept you from starting. Then Tomas refused to hand her the slip to sign. She said to him sweetly, as if asking him for a favor, Give it to me, please. And then she squinted again and added, After all, I'm not paying for it. My husband is. And you're not being paid for it. The state is. The transaction has nothing whatever to do with the two of us. 11. The odd asymmetry of the woman who looked like a giraffe and a stork continued to excite his memory. The combination of the flirtatious and the gawky, the very real sexual desire offset by the ironic smile, the vulgar conventionality of the flat and the originality of its owner. What would she be like then when they made love? Try as he might, he could not picture it. He thought of nothing else for several days. The next time he answered her summons, the wine and 2 glasses stood waiting on the table, and this time everything went like clockwork. Before long they were standing face to face in the bedroom, where the sun was setting on birches and the painting and kissing. But when he gave her his standard strip command, she not only failed to comply but counter-commanded, No, you first. Unaccustomed to such a response, he was somewhat taken aback. She started to open his fly. After ordering strip several more times with comic failure, he was forced to accept compromise. According to the rules of the game she had set up during his last visit, Do As I Do, she took off his trousers, he took off her skirt, and she took off his shirt, he her blouse, until at last they stood there naked. He placed his hand on her moist genitals and moved his fingers along to the spot he loved most in all women's bodies. Hers was unusually prominent, evoking the long digestive tract that ended there with a slight protrusion. Fingering her strong, healthy orb, that most splendid of rings called by doctors the sphincter, he suddenly felt her fingers on the corresponding part of his own anatomy. She was mimicking his moves with the precision of a mirror, even though, as I pointed it out, he had known approximately 200 women, plus a considerable lot had been accrued during his days as a window washer. He had yet to be faced with a woman who was taller than he was, squinted at him, and fingered his. To overcome his embarrassment, he forced her down on the bed. So precipitous was this move that he caught her off guard. As her towering frame fell on his back, he caught among the red blotches of her face the frightened expression of equilibrium lost. Now that he was standing over her, he grabbed her under the knees and lifted her slightly parted legs in the air, so that they suddenly looked like the raised arms of a soldier surrendering to a gun pointed at him. Clumsiness combined with ardor with clumsiness, they excited Tomas utterly. He made love to her for a very long time, constantly scanning her red-blotched face for that frightened expression of a woman when someone has tripped and who is following the inimitable expression that moments earlier had conveyed excitement to his brain. Then he went to wash the bathroom. She followed him in and gave him long, drawn-out explanations of where the soap was, where the sponge was, and how to turn on the hot water. He was surprised that she went into such detail over such simple matters. At last he had to tell her that he understood everything perfectly and motioned to her to leave him alone in the bathroom. Won't you let me stay and watch? She begged. At last he managed to get her out, as he watched and urinated into the wash basin, standard procedure among Czech doctors. He had the feeling she was running back and forth outside the bathroom, looking for a way to break in. When he turned off the water and the flat was suddenly silent, he felt he was being watched. He was nearly certain that there was a peephole somewhere in the bathroom door and that her beautiful eye was squinting through it. He went off into the best of moods, trying to fix her essence in his memory, reduced to that memory to a chemical formula capable of defining her uniqueness, her millionth part dissimilarity. The result was a formula consisting of 3 givens. 1. Clumsiness with ardor. 2. The frightened face of one who has lost her equilibrium and is falling. And 3. Legs raised in the air like the arms of a soldier surrendering to a pointed gun. Going over them, he felt the joy of having acquired yet another piece of the world, of having taken his imaginary scalpel and snipped yet another snip off the infinite canvas of the universe. 12. At about the same time he had the following experience. He had been meeting a young woman in a room that an old friend put at his disposal every day till midnight. After a month or two, she reminded him of one of their early encounters. They had made love on a rug under the window while it was thundering and lightning outside. They had made love for the length of the storm. It had been unforgettably beautiful. Tomas was appalled. Yes, he remembered making love to her on the rug. His friend slept on the narrow couch that Tomas found uncomfortable, but he had completely forgotten the storm. It was odd. He could recall each of their times together. He had even kept close track of the ways they made love. She refused to enter from behind. She remembered several of the things she had said during intercourse. She would ask him to squeeze her hips and stop looking at her all the time. He even remembered the cut of her lingerie, but the storm had left no trace. Of each erotic experience his memory recorded only the steep and narrow path of sexual conquest, the first piece of verbal aggression, the first touch, the first obscenity he said to her, and she to him, and the minor perversions he could make her acquiesce in, and the ones she held out against. All else he excluded, almost pedantically, from his memory. He even forgot where he had first seen one or another woman, if that event occurred before his sexual offensive began. The young woman smiled dreamily as she went on about the storm, and he looked at her in amazement and something akin to shame. She had experienced something beautiful. He had failed to experience it with her. The two ways in which their memories reacted to the evening storm sharply delimit love and non-love. The word non-love, I do not wish to imply he took a cynical attitude to the young woman. As present-day parlance has it, he looked upon her as a sex object. On the contrary, he was quite fond of her, valued her character and intelligence, and was willing to come to her aid if she ever needed him. He was not the one who behaved shamefully towards her. It was his memory, for it was his memory that, unbeknown to him, had excluded her from the sphere of love. The brain appears to possess a special area, which we might call poetic memory, and which records everything that charms or touches us, that makes our lives beautiful. From the time he met Teresa, no woman had the right to leave the slightest impression on that part of his brain. Teresa occupied his poetic memory like a despot, and exterminated all trace of other women. That was unfair, because the young woman he made love to on the rug during the storm was not a bit less worthy of poetry than Teresa. She shouted, "Close your eyes, squeeze my hips, hold me tight." She could not stand it that Tomas made love and kept his eyes open, focused and observant, his body ever so slightly arched above her, never pressing against her skin. She did not want him to study her. She wanted him to draw into the magic stream that may be entered only with closed eyes. The reason she refused to get down on all fours was that in that position their bodies did not touch at all. He could not observe her from the distance of several feet. She hated that distance. She wanted to merge with him. That is why, looking him straight in the eyes, she insisted she had not had an orgasm, even though the rug was fairly dripping with it. "It's not sensual pleasure I'm after," she would say. "It's happiness, and pleasure without happiness is not pleasure." In other words, she was pounding on the gate of his poetic memory. But the gate was shut. There was no room for her in his poetic memory. There was room for her only in the rug. His adventure with Teresa began at the exact point where his adventures with other women left off. It took place on the other side of an imperative that pushed him into the conquest after conquest. He had no desire to uncover anything in Teresa. She had come to him uncovered. He had made love to her before he could grab for the imaginary scalpel he used to open the prostrate body of the world. Before he could start wondering what she would be like when they made love, he loved her. Their true story did not begin until afterwards. She fell ill and was unable to send her home as he had others. Kneeling by her as she lay sleeping in his bed, he realized that someone had sent her downstream in a bulrush basket. I have said before that metaphors are dangerous. Love begins with a metaphor, which is to say, love begins at the point when a woman enters her first word into our poetic memory. 13. Recently she had made another entry into his mind. Returning home with the milk one morning, as usual, she stood in the doorway, the crow wrapped in a red scarf and pressed against her breast. It was the way gypsies held their babies. He would never forget it, the crow's enormous plaintive beak up next to her face. She had found it half buried, the way Cossacks used to dig their prisoners into the ground. It was children, she said, and her words did more than state a fact. They revealed an unexpected repugnance for people in general. It reminded him of something she had said to him not long before. "I'm beginning to be grateful to you for not wanting to have children." And then she complained to him about a man who had been bothering her at work. He had grabbed a cheap necklace of hers, suggested that the only way she could have afforded it was by doing some prostitution on the side. She was very upset about it. More than necessary, thought Tomas. He suddenly felt dismayed at how little he had seen of her in the last 2 years. He had so few opportunities to press his hands in his and stop them from trembling. The next morning he had gone to work with Teresa on his mind. The woman who gave the window washers their assignments told him that a private customer had insisted on him personally. Tomas was not looking forward to it. He was afraid it was still another woman, fully occupied with Teresa. He was in no mood for adventure. When the door opened, he gave a sigh of relief. He saw a tall, slightly stooped man before him. The man had a big chin and seemed vaguely familiar. "Come in," said the man with a smile, taking him inside. There was also a young man standing there. His face was bright red. He was looking at Tomas and trying to smile. "I assume there's no need for me to introduce you to," said the man. "No," said Tomas. Without returning the smile, he held out his hand for the young man. It was his son. Only then did the man with the big chin introduce himself. "I knew you looked familiar," said Tomas. "Of course, now I place you. It was the name that did it." They sat down at what looked like a small conference table. Tomas realized that both men opposite him were his own involuntary creations. He had been forced to produce the young one by his first wife, and the features of the older one had taken shape when he was under interrogation by the police. To clear his mind of these thoughts, he said, "Well, which window do you want me to start with?" Both men burst out laughing. Clearly, windows had nothing to do with the case. He had not been called in to do the windows. He had been lured into a trap. He had never before talked to his son. This was the first time he had shaken hands with him. He knew him only by sight, had no desire to know him in either way. As far as he was concerned, the less he knew about his son, the better, and they hoped the feeling was mutual. "Nice poster, isn't it?" said the editor, pointing out a large framed drawing on the wall opposite Tomas. Tomas now glanced around the room. The walls were hung with interesting pictures, mostly photographs and posters. The drawing the editor had singled out had come from out of the last issues of his paper before the Russians closed it down in 1969. It was an imitation of a famous recruitment poster for the Russian Civil War of 1918, showing a soldier, a red star on his cap, an extraordinarily stern look in his eyes, staring straight at you and aiming his index finger at you. The original Russian caption read, "Citizen, have you joined the Red Army?" It was replaced by Czech text that read, "Citizen, have you signed the 2,000 words?" That was an excellent joke. The 2,000 words was the first glorious manifesto of the 1968 Prague Spring. It called for the radical democratization of the communist regime. First it was signed by a number of intellectuals, then other people came forward and asked to sign. Finally, there were so many signatures that no one could quite count them up. The Red Army invaded their country and launched a series of political purges. One of the questions asked of each citizen was, "Have you signed the 2,000 words?" Anyone who admitted to having done so was similarly dismissed from his job. "A fine poster," said Tomas. "I remember it well. Let's hope the Red Army man isn't listening in on us," said the editor with a smile. Then he went on without the smile. "Seriously, though, this isn't my flat. It belongs to a friend. We can't be absolutely certain the police can hear us. It's only a possibility. If I'd invited you to my place, it would have been a certainty." Then he switched back to a playful tone. "By the way I look at it, we've got nothing to hide, and think what a boon it will be to have the Czech historians of the future, the complete recorded lives of the Czech intelligentsia on file in the police archives. Do you know what effort literary historians have put into reconstructing the sex lives of, say, Voltaire or Balzac or Tolstoy? No such problems with Czech writers. It's all on tape, every last sign." And turning to the imaginary microphones on the wall, he said in a stentorian voice, "Gentlemen, as always in such circumstances, I wish to take this opportunity to encourage you in your work and to thank you on my behalf and on behalf of all future historians." After the three of them had had a good laugh, the editor told a story of how his paper had been banned, what the artist who designed the poster was doing, and what had become of other Czech painters, philosophers, and writers. After the Russian invasion, they had been relieved of their positions and became window washers, parking attendants, night watchmen, boilermen, and public buildings, or at best and usually with pool taxi drivers. Although the editor said was interesting enough, Tomas was unable to concentrate on it. He was thinking about his son. He remembered passing him in the street during his past 2 months. Apparently these encounters had not been fortuitous. He certainly never expected to find him in the company of a persecuted editor. Tomas's first wife was an orthodox communist, and Tomas automatically assumed that his son was under her influence. He knew nothing about him. Of course, he could have come out and asked him what kind of relationship he had with his mother, but he felt that it would have been tactless in the presence of a third party. At last the editor came to the point. He said that more and more people were going to prison for offense other than upholding their own opinions, and concluded with words, "So we've decided to do something." "What is it you want to do?" asked Tomas. Here his son took over. It is the first time he had ever heard him speak. He was surprised to note that he stuttered. "According to your sources," he said, "political prisoners are being subjected to very rough treatment. Several are in a bad way. And so we've decided to draft a petition to have it signed by the most important Czech individuals, the ones who still mean something." No, it wasn't actually a stutter. It was more of a stammer, slowing down the flow of speech, stressing or highlighting every word he uttered, whether he wanted to or not, and he obviously felt himself doing it. His cheeks, which had barely regained their natural pallor, turned scarlet again. "And you called me in for advice on likely candidates in my field?" Tomas asked. "No," the editor said, laughing. We don't want your advice. We want your signature. And again he felt flattered. Again he enjoyed the feeling that he had not only been forgiven, forgotten as a surgeon. He protested, but only out of modesty. Wait a minute. Just because they kicked me out doesn't mean I'm a famous doctor. We haven't forgotten that you wrote for our paper, said the editor, smiling at Tomas. Yes, said Tomas's son with an alacrity Tomas may have missed. I don't see how my name on a petition can help you with your political prisoners. Wouldn't it be better to have it signed by people who haven't fallen in fall of the regime? People who have at least some influence over the powers that be? The editor smiled. Of course it would. Tomas's son smiled too. He smiled the smile of one who understands many things. The only trouble is they never sign. Which doesn't mean we don't go after them, the editor continued, or that we're too nice to spare them the embarrassment. He laughed. You should hear the excuses they give. They're fantastic. Tomas's son laughed in agreement. Of course, they all begin by claiming they agree right down the line. The editor went on. We just need a different approach, they say. Something more prudent, more reasonable, more discreet. They're scared to sign and worry that if they don't, they'll sink in their estimation. Again, Tomas's son and the editor laughed together. Then the editor gave Tomas a sheet of paper with a short text calling upon the President of the Republic in a relatively respectful manner to grant amnesty to all political prisoners. Tomas ran the idea quickly through his mind. Amnesty to political prisoners? Would amnesty be granted because people jettisoned by the regime, and therefore themselves potential political prisoners, requested to the President? The only thing such a position would accomplish was to keep political prisoners from being amnestied, if there were happened to be a plan afoot to do so. His son interrupted his thoughts. The main thing is to make the point that there are still a handful of people in his country who are not afraid, and to show who stands where, separate the wheat from the chaff. True, thought Tomas. But he had to do with the political prisoners. Either you called for amnesty or you separated the wheat from the chaff. The two were not identical. On the fence, the editor asked. Yes, he was on the fence, but he was afraid to say so. There was a picture on the wall, a picture of the soldier pointing out a threatening finger at him and saying, Are you hesitating about joining the Red Army, or haven't you signed the 2,000 words yet? Or have you too signed the 2,000 words? You don't mean you don't want to sign the amnesty petition? But no matter what the soldier said, it was a threat. The editor had barely finished saying what he thought about people who agree the political prisoners there should be granted amnesty. There come out thousands of reasons against signing the petition. In his opinion, their reasons were just so many excuses. Their excuses a smokescreen for cowardice. What could Tomas say? At last he broke the silence with a laugh, and pointing to the poster on the wall, he said, What soldier threatening me, asking whether to sign or not? I can't possibly think straight. Then all three laughed for a while. All right, said Tomas after the laughter had died down. I'll think it over. Can we get together again in the next few days? Any time at all, said the editor, but unfortunately, the petition can't wait. We have to get it to the President tomorrow. Tomorrow. And suddenly Tomas recalled the portly policeman handing him the denunciation of none other than his tall editor with the big chin. Everyone was trying to make him sign statements he had not written himself. There's nothing to think over anyway, said his son, although his words were aggressive. His intonation bordered on the supplicatory. Now that they were looking at each other, in the eye, Tomas noticed that when concentrating, the boy slightly raised the left side of his upper lip. It was an expression he saw in his own face whenever he peered into the mirror. To determine whether it was clean-shaven, discovering it on the face of another made him uneasy. When his parents live with their children through childhood, they grow accustomed to that kind of similarity. It seems trivial to them, or if they stop to think about it, amusing. But Tomas was talking to his son for the first time in his life. He was not used to sitting face to face with his own asymmetrical mouth. Imagine having an arm amputated and implanted on someone else. Imagine that person sitting opposite you and gesticulating with it in your face. You would stare at that arm as if a ghost. Even though it was your own personal beloved arm, you would be horrified at the possibility of its touching you. Aren't you on the side of the persecuted? The son added, and Tomas suddenly saw what was really at stake in his scene they was playing. Not the amnesty of the political prisoner, it was the relationship with his son. If he signed, their fates would be united, and Tomas would be more or less obliged to befriend him. If he failed to sign, the relations would remain null as before, though not as so much by will as the will of his son. He would renounce his father as cowardice. He was in the situation of a chess player who cannot avoid checkmate and is forced to resign. Whether he signed the petition or not made the slightest difference. It would alter nothing in his life and the lives of the political prisoners. Hand it over, he said, and took the sheet of paper. 14. As if rewarding him for his decision, the editor said, That was a fine piece of work you wrote about Oedipus. Handing him a pen, his son added, Some ideas have the force of a bomb exploding. Although the editor's words of praise pleased him, his son's metaphor struck him as forced and out of place. Unfortunately, I was the only casualty, he said. Thanks to those ideas, I can no longer operate on my patients. It sounded cold, almost hostile, apparently hoping to counteract the discordant note, the editor said by way of apology. But think of the people your article helped. From childhood, Tomas had associated the words helping people with one thing and one thing only, medicine. How could an article help people? What were those two trying to make him swallow, reducing his whole life to a single small idea about Oedipus, and even less, to a single primitive no in the face of the regime? Maybe it helped people, maybe it didn't, he said, in a voice still cold, though he probably did not realize it, but as a surgeon I know I saved a few lives. Another silence set in. Tomas' son broke it. Ideas can save lives too. Watching his own mouth and the boy's face, Tomas thought how strange to see one's own lips stammer. You know the best thing about what you wrote, the boy went on, and Tomas could see the effort it cost him to speak. Your refusal to compromise, your clear-cut sense of what's good and what's evil, something we're beginning to lose. We have no idea what it means to feel guilty. The communists have the excuse that Stalin misled them. Murderers have the excuse that their mothers didn't love them, and suddenly you come out and say there is no excuse. No one could be more innocent in his soul and his conscience than Oedipus, and yet he punished himself when he saw what he had done. Tomas tore his eyes away from his son's mouth and tried to focus on the irritator. He was irritated and felt like arguing with them. But it's all a misunderstanding. The border between good and evil is terribly fuzzy. I wasn't out to punish anyone either. Punishing people who don't know what they've done is barbaric. The myth of Oedipus is a beautiful one. But treating it like this, he had more to say, but suddenly he remembered that the place could be bugged. He had not the slightest ambition to be quoted by historians of centuries to come. He was simply afraid of being quoted by the police. Wasn't that what they wanted from him? After all, condemnation of the article, he did not like the idea of feeding it to them from his own lips. Besides, he knew that anything anyone in the country had said would be broadcast over the radio at any time. He held his tongue. I wonder what's made you change your mind, said the editor. What I wonder is what made me write the thing in the first place, said Tomas, and just then he remembered she had laughed at his bedside. So I landed at his bedside like a child sent downstream in a bulrush basket. Yes, that was why he had picked up the book and gone back to the stories of Romulus, Moses, and Oedipus. And now she was with him again, and he saw her pressing the crow-wrapped red to her breast. The image of her brought him peace. It seemed to tell him that Teresa was alive and that she was with him in the same city and that nothing else counted. The time. Editor broke the silence. I understand. I don't like the idea of punishment either. After all, he added, smiling, we don't call for punishment to be inflicted. We call for it to cease. I know, said Tomas. In the next few moments he would do something possibly noble, but certainly and totally useless, because it would not help the political prisoners, and unpleasant to himself, because it took place under conditions the two of them had imposed on him. It's your duty to sign, his son added, almost pleading. Duty? His son reminding him of his duty? That was the worst word anyone could have used on him. Once more, the image of Teresa appeared before his eyes, Teresa holding the crow in her arms. Then he remembered that she had been accosted by the undercover agent the day before. Her hands started trembling again. She had aged. She was all that mattered to him. She, born of the fortuities. 6. That she, blossom sprung from the chief surgeon's sciatica. She, the reverse side of all his esmuse. She was the only thing he cared about. Why even think about whether to sign or not? There was only one criterion for all his decisions. He must do something about that, or it could harm her. Tomas could not save political prisoners, but he could make Teresa happy. He could not really succeed in doing even that, but if he signed the petition, he could be fairly certain that she would have more frequent visits from undercover agents, and that her hands would tremble more and more. It is much more important to dig a half-buried crow out of the ground, he said, than to send petitions to a president. He knew that his words were incomprehensible, but enjoyed them all the more for it. He felt a sudden, unexpected intoxication come over him. It was the same black intoxication he had felt when he solemnly announced to his wife that he no longer wished to see her or his son. It was the same black intoxication he had felt whenever he sent off the letter that meant the end of his career in medicine. He was not at all sure he was doing the right thing, but he was sure that he was doing what he wanted to do. I'm sorry, he said, but I'm not going to sign.